like a really wide range of different kinds of mental health conditions, and it can be helpful in breaking down stigma to understand those different experiences. So Ruby is going to help us break down stigma by talking a little bit about borderline personality disorder and what it looks like to live with that. And then while she's setting up what is ahead for the rest of the meeting, you'll see on that table, we laid out a bunch of flyer designs that Socorro and Danielle sketched out. And we're going to kind of take a look at them, look at the things that we like, the things that we don't like, and maybe what we want to change. And then we'll also talk about the details of planning the town hall and divide up some of the roles. So we have a lot to cover today. After Ruby's presentation, y'all will have a chance to walk through the aisle and look at some of the flyer designs to give your input. And also, Nancy helped me write up some of the questions that you all brainstormed last Friday, and so we'll review those and maybe add to them so we can get a good list. Does that sound good to you all? Mm-hmm. And as a reminder, the town hall is April 23rd, that Tuesday. But it's the Tuesday before prom, so hopefully there aren't too many things happening on a Tuesday night. If you're free, it would be awesome if you could support, and if you're not free, that's totally fine. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to start.
Would you mind clicking?
Yes, I can click for you, just let me know.
You want to turn the light off? Like
Yeah,
one
maybe
of them?
just the front. Maybe just give me 1 second. There we go.
Yep.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ruby Salazar, and I work with the Youth Leadership Institute. And today I'm going to be presenting to you on borderline personality disorder, which is for my communications course at College of San Mateo. So borderline personality disorder is it's a really stigmatized disorder, and about 400 million people here in the United States have this disorder. And it's very important because a lot of people, like I said, it's very stigmatized. So it's very important to learn about this and just educate others about it. So people, when you do find someone who does have this disorder, or maybe you might see some of the symptoms and kind of think that you know someone who has the disorder, you'll be able to understand how to help them. Next slide. Sorry. Okay, so why is BPD or borderline personality disorder inside? There's about 1.6% in the whole population that has borderline personality disorder, and although that might seem like a really small number, 5.7% of people are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is the most common misdiagnosis for borderline personality disorder. And this has to do a lot with a lot of people don't know about borderline personality disorder, and a lot of the symptoms seem very similar to bipolar disorder. We'll talk about some of the symptoms later on, but some of the symptoms for bipolar disorder are mania and depression. So what that means is usually someone who has bipolar disorder for a period of time, it can be a week to like even longer, to like a month or a couple days. They'll be extremely happy, and then after that, they can switch moods completely after that week or month and be extremely depressed and sad. And that's the difference between bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. Because with borderline personality disorder, although the person does fluctuate in their emotions, like in bipolar disorder, it's not the same in the sense that they can switch emotions in one day. They can be happy in the morning, and then in the next 5 minutes, really sad, and then happy again. So that's how you can differentiate the two. It is also very unknown if this misdiagnosis of borderline personality disorder has to do anything with gender bias, because a lot of women, mainly women, are diagnosed by borderline personality disorder, and there's less men diagnosed. But this is unsure if it's due to gender bias. Like, most likely men are probably diagnosed with PTSD or depression or bipolar disorder and not borderline personality disorder. And it's important to get the diagnosis correctly, because if you don't, there's a lot of other symptoms inside borderline personality disorder that you might have, like depression. But if you just treat the depression, you're not treating the actual cause of the depression, which is the borderline personality disorder, which would mean that you would go to your doctor you would tell them, oh, this medication isn't working for me because I still feel sad all the time. And if you're not telling the doctor all your symptoms or the psychologist, then they're not going to know what exactly is going on with you. So we'll discuss a little bit of the symptoms. And there's 9 symptoms, and I'll be showing you guys how you guys can help someone who has these symptoms, or how you guys can research help for yourself as well. Next slide. So what is BPD? BPD, or borderline personality disorder, was recognized, or the definition that was said by NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Health, said it's a condition characterized by difficulties regulating emotions. So what this means is that this person usually has a lot of unstable emotions and experiences them very extremely. The person who first found out a quote that they said is by Marsha M. Lennon. Next slide. And what she said is she described people with borderline personality disorder, BPD, are like people with third-degree burns all over their body, lacking emotional skin. They feel agony at the slightest touch or movement. So what this basically is saying is that people with borderline personality disorder experience emotions very intensely, and because of this, it's very difficult. Like here we can see that people, when they're just got burned, like they don't have as much skin, and here it's saying that they feel every single pain that someone tells them, even if it's unintentional by the other person. That's just how they experience their emotions, and it's very difficult to regulate them. So there's a lot of stigma surrounding borderline personality disorder because of this, because they have difficulty regulating their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And Marsha Lennon actually says that a better name that isn't as stigmatizing would be dysregulation disorder. And it's very hard to talk even like to a psychologist about borderline personality disorder because it's even stigmatized within the psychology field. A lot of psychologists who work with people who have borderline personality disorder sometimes think they are very negligent. They don't want to seek treatment. The treatment isn't working. But it's not that the treatment isn't working. It's just that they don't have the correct tools to be able to regulate their emotions and actually seek for that help. So it's very important that someone who has borderline personality disorder seeks for help with a correct psychologist that can actually help them. And we'll be talking about a couple of treatments that they could take, as well as how they're portrayed in the media. So sometimes, if you ever look at borderline personality disorder, there's like a mixture of opinions. Some people they understand borderline personality disorder, but a lot of people actually don't. And they think it's like, they portray someone with borderline personality disorder as someone who is very dangerous and as if they're walking around eggshells around them. So it means that because they know that their emotions they're not regulated, they have extreme outbursts sometimes because they feel everything so intensely. And that because of that, a lot of people who are around people with borderline personality disorder feel like they have to like tiptoe around them because they don't want to hurt their feelings, they don't want them to create an outburst or things like that. Next slide. So, yes?
The symptoms of like being sad or depressed or like happy, are they triggered by something or are they just like naturally?
Yes, so they are triggered by something. Sometimes the person with borderline personality disorder doesn't know what exactly triggered them, but because they were triggered, they create like an outburst. So we will talk about the different symptoms in a minute, but the way that the psychologists figure out like what diagnosis you have is through the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And this is basically a book that tells all psychologists what symptoms the person has, and it's categorized into different categories, and then that's the way that they can find out who is diagnosed with what disorder. And this is, like I said, very important to make sure that you're getting the right disorder. As we can see here in this picture, it says, "Doc, are you sure I have this diagnosis? Does it actually fit my description?" Because like I mentioned before, if someone is treated with a mental health disorder that, like let's say they come in for depression and anxiety, but they also have borderline personality disorder, those medications that they're being given for anxiety and depression aren't going to treat the underlying cause of borderline personality disorder, so they'll continue feeling the same way. And what the doctor will usually do, if he doesn't know any other symptoms, is prescribe higher medication for them. And that still isn't going to help them because it's not treating the underlying cause of what is actually happening with them. Next slide. So here we have a couple of symptoms of borderline personality disorder. The biggest one that we see is fear of abandonment. And what this means is that people with BPD are very afraid of minor or imagined abandonment. So this makes it really difficult for them to establish relationships with other people because let's say they're texting with someone and that person, they're texting their best friend, and the person with borderline personality disorder is very excited that they want to go out to see a movie with their friend. And they text their friend, hey, can we go see a movie? The friend doesn't respond for 5 minutes. Then they're like, hey, can we see a movie? What's up? Then they're like, they still don't respond. And in their mind, it's like saying, oh, my friend doesn't want to hang out with me. They don't like me. They hate me. That's what's going on through the mind of a person with borderline personality disorder. So it's very difficult, and they usually end up, because of that trigger of them feeling abandonment or like imagined abandonment, they will lash out and say like, you hate me, like why aren't you responding, and start acting out because of them not being able to regulate their emotions. Another symptom is a pattern of intense, unstable relationships, which I just discussed. They quickly attach to new partners, and they have lack of boundaries and idolize individuals. And this basically means that one day they can absolutely love a person, the next, like within an hour or even the next day, like in a short period of time, they can absolutely hate that person. And this isn't like to scare you guys about someone who has borderline personality disorder. It's just really misunderstood, and they just need the tools, the correct tools, to be able to help them understand and how to regulate their emotions. And because of this, they have very unstable relationships. They usually get into relationships very quickly. They usually are like, oh, like we should get married already within like the first week of the relationship because of their fear of abandonment and because of their borderline personality disorder. And at the same time, they can also absolutely hate that person. Something else is that they're very impulsive and do a lot of self-damaging acts. Because the mindset of a person with borderline personality disorder sometimes makes them feel very like negative. Like the example that I mentioned with texting like your friend, after that, the person will feel very guilty that they said all those things to their friend. They'll be like, why did I say that? Like, obviously my friend doesn't feel that way. And then they'll feel very guilty and start thinking that they're a very horrible person, that they are like the worst person on the planet, that they shouldn't be friends with this person any longer because they just break relationships, because they're always having unstable relationships. And sometimes this leads to self-damaging acts like impulsivity. A lot of people with borderline personality disorder will binge eat a lot because they feel like this emptiness and don't know how to like deal with it. They will binge eat. They'll eat a bunch of food, or they can do things like recklessly drive, and they're not doing it like consciously. They're just acting out because they don't know how to regulate those emotions or actions. And they also can do things like use drugs to help cope with their disorder because they feel very lonely. And another important part of borderline personality disorder is that they also sometimes have like suicidal thoughts. And because of those suicidal thoughts, in that moment they actually feel like they physically feel like they want to leave the world, like they don't want to be here anymore. But at the same time, they don't want to leave. Like a lot of the times, they don't actually act on the suicidal thoughts, but they actually, instead of acting on the suicidal thoughts, they just like use it as a way to get the person back. So sometimes they will tell their significant other, please like don't leave me, I'm gonna commit suicide, just to get that person back, and like use it as a technique to kind of like not be left behind by that person, because usually that person, the significant other, is going to feel very like upset about this, so they will most likely try to calm the person down and not leave them. There's also emotional instability, frequent and dramatic changes in effects too short to be considered changes in mood but moody. So a lot of people with borderline personality disorder are portrayed as crazy, as like they say like you're acting crazy because they don't know how to regulate these emotions, so they're just, everything is felt so intensely that their emotions are also expressed so intensely. So you can see this person cry like a bunch, like even if it's to you it might not seem like something big, like maybe something happened in school the other day, or like a lot of series of events sometimes happen, and then that just leads that person to like shut down completely. And to you, it might not seem like something big, but to them, it triggered them in some way, and because of that, they're experiencing this intense emotion. They also have suicidal thoughts, threats, or gestures. They sometimes self-mutilate. Suicide notes are frequently left and kind of like left around to someone to find because they want someone to like feel that they are loved, and they use this tactic to try to get them to come back sometimes. They also have a persistent feeling of emptiness and guilt. Like I mentioned, going back to that other example, like if we look up here, there's a picture of Stitch, and he says, "Is it too much to ask for you to leave me alone, but always be with me?" So that kind of explains like the thought process of what someone with BPD is experiencing. And down here, we also see something else that says, "I knew who I was this morning, but I changed a few times since then." So that's kind of explaining how how different their emotions change so often within just one day. And that's how you can tell if this person has borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder, because someone with bipolar disorder, their emotions are like different. Like they'll be really happy one day and really sad one day, but the time period is much longer than someone with borderline personality disorder. They also have episodes of dissociation, paranoid ideas or illusions of transistent and induced by stressful external events. So what this means is that sometimes the person with borderline personality disorder will be sometimes they'll just blank out, like they're having a conversation with someone else and they'll dissociate. They will completely blank out of that conversation and start thinking about other things in their mind. Sometimes it's a lot of negative thoughts inside their mind, and they get paranoid. They start thinking about a lot of things in their brain, like their thoughts they're constant and they don't stop, and they're usually a lot of negative thoughts. So that makes that person very paranoid, or sometimes they're like, oh, everyone's out to get me, no one likes me. And because of this negative train of thought, they end up doing things like trying to commit suicide, or having that fear of abandonment and lashing out at someone else because of that. They also have instability to regulate emotions and difficulties controlling anger. They will sometimes act out on that emotion, and will like start hitting people, and not like randomly. Like they'll usually like. There's a lot of different types of people with borderline personality disorder, and some people do end up acting out like in the workplace, and sometimes it makes it very difficult for them to actually like have a stable work environment. Yes, Mika? Yes, I'll be done shortly. And then disturbances of self-image. So what this basically means is that they really don't know who they are as a person themselves, so they really struggle with that deeply. And because of that, they're very confused of who they are as a person and what they're going to do in life, and that really causes like these negative feelings again. Next slide. So how can you help someone with borderline personality disorder? So there is a treatment called DBT, or dialectal behavior therapy, and what this basically teaches them is, in other words, this is called talk therapy, and it's a psychotherapy or a form of cognitive behavior therapy that was designed by Marsha Linehan to help people specifically with borderline personality disorder. And what this teaches them is the skills that they just don't have naturally like everyone else. They teach them mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, and learning to walk in the middle path and trying to understand both sides of the story. Because oftentimes people with BPD think black and white. Either someone's good or they're bad, they're evil. Next slide. So BPD is a serious mental illness, and because of that, it is very stigmatized even within the mental health world, and it makes it even more difficult with someone with BPD to seek out for help, because sometimes psychologists don't understand or haven't worked with people with BPD and think they're resisting to treatment, that they don't want to get help, but it's just that they don't have the correct tools to do that. So it's important important to understand that people with BPD aren't overreacting, and when you do meet someone with borderline personality disorder, or have it yourself or know of a significant other, make sure not to say things like you're overreacting, you're acting crazy, because those kind of words just make that person feel even worse than they already initially did. And instead, it's important to say things like, your feelings are valid and we should seek for help. Next slide. So things to remember. So it's important that you understand that people with borderline personality disorder don't have these tools like everyone else to regulate their emotions and actions. And because of this, it causes difficulty building relationships. So it's important to remember to be patient, and also remember that although people with borderline personality disorder might have difficulties building relationships, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be with them, or you shouldn't hang out with them, or that they can't hold a stable job, or that they can't have a successful relationship or live happily with this disorder. It just means that they have a little bit more difficulty than most people, but they could still learn coping skills with dialectal DBT to help them understand that. And also remembering that people with borderline personality disorder, because of their disorder, they're some of the most loving and caring people in the world. Next slide. And also remember that people with borderline personality disorder are people born with a soul that is way too sensitive for this cold and ugly world, and that they have always felt things deeply than most people, and that this has always been their blessing and their curse. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, you all.
Or did you have a question? Okay, if you guys would like to talk to me any point after this presentation, if you think you know someone who has BPD or borderline personality disorder, or you might have it yourself, feel free to talk to me about it. I am more than happy to give you guys more information about it. And Smitha has all my contact information, so thank you.
I'll put Ruby's email on the board if you want to send her any questions. Thank you, Ruby. All right, let's turn this off.
Okay, Rob, can you turn off the...
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, we're going to start talking about the town hall. So, recognizing that we don't have a ton of time, what we're going to do is just kind of talk